Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Ms. Feinberg, and I want to thank you for your time and attention the day following the tragedy when Chairman Denham, Ranking Member Capuano, and myself went and visited the site. My question to you relates to 49 CFR Part 220, restrictions on railroad operating employees' use of cellular telephones and other electronic devices. The final rule in which the Secretary essentially delegated to you the duties to exercise the authority to prohibit the use of personal electronic devices that may distract employees from safely performing their duties. The FRA study found railroad operating employees were increasingly using distracting electronic devices in a manner that created hazards. And I'm going from the Federal Registrar dated Monday, September 27, 2010. And I found this part particularly interesting, and it forms the basis of my question. Relating to access to employees' personal cell phone records, FRA has decided that a provision mandating that railroads require operating employees to provide access to personal cell phone records in the event of an accident is unnecessary for FRA purposes. Instead, FRA currently uses its investigative authority to obtain personal cell phone records when appropriate. Is that what you're doing now? In other words, it's through your investigative arm, not that's how you're getting to the personal cell phone records?
That's correct. So following the accident, we just subpoenaed those records.
And in looking at, and we've talked a little bit about inward-looking cameras, I think is the term. If you had inward-looking cameras, would the operating engineer, at that point in time, you'd be able to ascertain whether or not a personal cell phone was being used, correct?
That's one of the purposes of an inward-facing camera.
Is there concerns that without the inward-facing camera there, I did also go through this rule in detail, there are times throughout a ride when it would be a legitimate, an operating engineer would legitimately be able to look at their personal cell phone?
The regulation is that the phone should be off and stored.
Should be, right. Okay. If we had an inward-facing camera, we would know already if that were the case.
Yes, and the inward-facing camera, I think, would also provide us information after an accident, which would be useful.
Right.
So we wouldn't be needing to have this debate at the moment.
And so my question next turns to Mr. Pierce. I understand that you were, I think, making a distinction between privacy concerns and a right to privacy. I sort of intuited that from some of your testimony and some of the questions that you were answering. Can you talk a little bit more about this reasonable implementation? Because I'm a little concerned when we're talking about the privacy concerns of an individual operating engineer who would be taped while they're in the performance of their duties, because essentially you have to balance that against the public safety considerations of the 200 or 300 plus passengers who are in the train. And I think a lot of us are concerned that your testimony seems to suggest that we need to really focus on the privacy concerns of the operating engineer and not some of the public safety assurances and some of the information that would be elicited if you had the inward-facing cameras moving forward. So I want to give you an opportunity to sort of share with me a little bit more, or share with us a little bit more, what it is about these privacy concerns that you hold so dear on behalf of your membership.
Well, thank you. I do want to first comment about the comments that were made earlier about litigation when cameras started. The unions didn't actually go to court to block cameras. KCS Railroad took us to court to install them. So I think the record needs to be clear on who actually started a litigation effort in order to install cameras. The cameras installed so far in the country have been on freight railroads, primarily on Class 1 properties. And those cameras run 24/7, whether the train is moving, whether the train is stopped, and we have crew members that could sit on a train for up to 6 hours without moving. We've asked that the railroad shut the cameras off if there's no safety-sensitive duties being performed, and they've refused. That is a privacy concern.
Okay, but what about when it's operating?
Right now they run 24/7. The parts that we have taken exception to, I'm trying to identify. We haven't said that there should be an outright prohibition. We've said that the implementation has been done in a way that there are disputes over it.
Do you believe that there is sound public policy in favor of having an inward-facing camera on the operating engineer at all times during the moving of a passenger rail?
I know that that's where the industry is headed.
That could be a yes or no answer.
Well, but just so you know, all of the activities of the engineer are already recorded on an event recorder through the technology of the control stand. All we're going to get is a picture of what he does. We already know, with the exception of the cell phone use, what he does.
See, my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.